Welcome to the New Mom Talk podcast, your go-to podcast for evidence-based answers to your burning questions about parenting. Join us as we dive into commonly Googled topics and hear from experts and real moms. Let's navigate parenthood together, one question at a time. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited about today's episode. We are going to talk about planning and budgeting for a postpartum doula support, which I highly recommend if you've never had a postpartum doula and are having a baby. This should be one of your priorities. So for that, we have Kathryn Keener. I'm going to hand it over to you. If you can start off with telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we'll dive right into it.
Okay, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Kathryn Keener. I own One Moon Doula Services in Southern California. And I opened it's a doula agency specifically focusing on postpartum doula support and newborn care specialists. And I opened it over 10 years ago when I was working myself as a postpartum doula and kept hearing from families that the process of finding and hiring and figuring out doula support was really daunting and overwhelming. It's not a regulated field. And so there's kind of a wide range of trainings and certification requirements and things like that. So I opened an agency to sort of be that go-between, create some vetting and accountability and quality assurance, but also support for those doulas who maybe took a training and were navigating this field, which again is sort of an untraditional career path. So we match families with postpartum doulas and everything that comes with that. I'm also working on, speaking of our topic today, a resource for families everywhere who are in that sort of planning and hiring stage. So for example, on our YouTube channel, we'll have more videos about deciding whether you want days or nights, how many weeks or months, what to think about when vetting and hiring a doula and things like that.
I love that. So I want to start off with the basic because I feel like a lot of people have heard of a birth doula, but maybe have not heard about a postpartum doula. With that, would you briefly be able to just share how postpartum doula is slightly different or how they differ from a birth doula?
Yeah, and you're right. I think people hear the word doula and they automatically think birth doula. And postpartum doula is kind of what it sounds like in that they begin after the baby is here. And so typically they're providing services in the home for a few weeks to a few months with multiple visits. It might be a few days per week or a few overnights per week or more. And they're there to be kind of an extra set of hands and expert and support for the whole family. So it can involve newborn care. It can involve education for the parents, helping them understand some soothing techniques or swaddling or bathing or any feeding issues. They have training, in postpartum recovery and infant feeding and things like that. And it's pretty well-rounded. A lot of times a postpartum doula might be, I mentioned newborn care, but she also might be just sort of prepping some meals and helping you stay organized while you bond with baby or taking on baby care so you can get a nap or hang out with your toddler. So, education, support, hands-on organization, things like that.
I love that you mentioned that because, again, I myself had a postpartum doula. And it was really nice to not feel guilty for sitting down and holding my baby while she made dinner for us or meals for the entire week for the whole family. And I feel like when you have family over that it's helping you, you kind of feel a little bit more like you need to be hosting and they need to be holding the baby, which is like, it's your baby. They're only this small for such a short time. So that's
Yeah.
We could talk about this for hours.
I know. We also get families who say, I just want the grandparents to be able to be grandparents, and I don't want it to become a source of tension or lean too hard on them. And same thing with couples, right? Couples end up leaning really hard on each other if they don't have adequate support. And so this can be sort of almost like a guilt-free break for everyone instead of I only get a break if you're pitching in and vice versa.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about how this might seem as a luxury expense for many. And I don't think it is. I think it's definitely something that you should really consider. So that said, what would you say to somebody who's on the fence about whether they should consider getting a postpartum doula? Should they put that on their registry? Why would this even be a priority instead of getting, I don't know, that really expensive baby bouncer?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think maybe I'll start by, well, a little bit kind of talking about what parents say. So we have a lot of second time parents who say the first time we spend our money, our budget on this or on that. And the second time we're really focused on the postpartum doula support. So they sort of learned what was lacking. And I think it's just where we are right now in kind of our culture and society is that a lot of families are not doing this with the level of extended family and friend support that, maybe is traditional and typical and necessary. So I feel like this does sort of fill a gap for a lot of people who either don't have a lot of local family or, like I mentioned before, like want to make sure that they don't stress their relationship too much, help siblings make a transition. So honestly, one of the biggest reasons is how critical sleep is. So whether you're using a doula for overnights, or to just catch a nap during the day, sleep is everything and it's important for, brain health and physical health. And so having adequate support often means, you're sort of staving off that extreme sleep deprivation and extreme depletion. A lot of times people are, healing from birth or cesarean birth. And this just kind of provides that cushion or that safety net. I hope I answered your question. I could probably go on and on about all the reasons, but I think it's filling a gap, honestly. I think families are a little bit too isolated or trying to take on a little bit too much on their own.
I am a big supporter in postpartum doula. So I agree with all of that. And in addition, I feel like as moms, we kind of have this idea that, especially first time, you could do it all. You can keep the house clean, you can recover, you can feed the baby, you can make everything from scratch, right? And so you're putting so much pressure on yourself and we just get burnt out. And then you kind of miss out on your first baby. You blink and all of a sudden they're one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
having that post, at least from my personal experience, for me, it was really nice to have that postpartum doula support and be able to have like my husband spend time with my son while I held the baby and dinner was being made or, my sheets were being changed and it wasn't this battle of like, who's going to do it or having to ask family. And in a way, I felt like I wasn't burdening anyone because I was paying for that help. Right. So
Yeah, absolutely. And part of what you're saying, the whole we think we can do it all, has a little bit to do with a discomfort receiving a certain level of help and support, a discomfort with just sort of admitting we can't, like, not only maybe we can't do everything, but maybe we shouldn't do everything because it's going to cost us. And so I think it is a little bit of a little bit of willingness to surrender to, I'm going to be a slightly less productive human being for some period of time, depending on how you define productive. And I'm going to allow myself like the grace of just, recovering. This is a massive transition for everyone in the family. And so, yes, you could do more, but maybe it's okay if for a little while you don't.
So I was going to ask you about typical costs, although I know that that's really going to vary depending on location. So if you could maybe just touch a little bit on the cost in general, because I know that we're probably going to be paying more here in California than, say, somebody in Oklahoma, right?
Yeah. 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 I'd love to talk about that because there is quite a range and there's even a range within locations, right? So I would say that one sort of marker for what to expect is this service is going to be meaningfully more expensive than like a babysitter or a nanny. And that's because there's additional, advanced training and expertise involved. It's also because these doulas, if you think about it, have very kind of unpredictable income in terms of, they have to maybe not time their clients' due dates too close together so there's not too much overlap. But then if, one baby comes early and another one comes late, then there's a big gap in between their clients. So it is hard to time it for kind of regular anticipated income. And so that's part of what influences that their maybe hourly rate has to reflect that and has to reflect that they're finding new clients every few months rather than locked in with one family for a couple of years. So the rates will be higher than babysitter and nanny rates in your area. I would say probably right now, like across the country, you're going to see anywhere for doulas that charge hourly, for postpartum doulas that charge hourly, probably anywhere from like 35 on the low to like maybe 85 on the high end. but probably most commonly you're going to see somewhere between like $45 and $70 an hour in most places. Even here in San Diego, and we serve San Diego and Orange County and LA, so there's some variation. But even just here in San Diego, we have in our network, in my agency, we have, I would say, like pretty equally qualified doulas that charge 45 and 65. And it's not that this doula who charges 45 is necessarily less qualified or less experienced. Sometimes it does fall along those lines in terms of, often the doulas that charge on the lower end tend to be newer doulas, but not always and not necessarily. And sometimes brand new doulas out of the gates are charging, the higher end of the spectrum for whatever reason, that it needs to make it work for them. So, that's individual doulas, and doulas also often will have like minimums, like a day shift with a postpartum doula typically is going to be at least 3 or 4 hours. It's hard to get a doula who's going to just show up for an hour or two. So most private doulas will have minimums like 4 hours for a day shift, like 8 hours for an overnight, sometimes more. So there's that as well. And then if you go through an agency, you might be possibly still within the range I mentioned, but often on the higher end of the range for your area because of obviously the bets and the value add of working with an agency, which we can talk more about, but extra vetting and peace of mind and support throughout, but not always astronomically higher than what a private doula charges, but sometimes on that higher end of the range.
Hi everyone, it's your host Mariella. I want to thank you for listening and share some ways to show your continued support. You can rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share the show with friends and family. Buy me a coffee to help with the financial costs of running a podcast. Follow me on Instagram at newmomtalk.podcast. And finally, subscribe to my newsletter. Thank you for listening.
With that, are there creative ways that families can make a postpartum doula support financially work or financially more accessible, such as like a baby registry or any other ways that you can think of? In my case, I put it on my baby registry as a high request. I didn't want all the stuff. And so people just put money in towards a fund if they wanted to get something for us as a family.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. I think it's such a great idea. And I think people feel really good about like, well, let's get together and get them a couple shifts with their doula, or I'm going to sort of sponsor a shift with a doula. And that really, helps maybe expand what you might otherwise, lock in with your contract with the doula. So I think that's a great idea. I think there are some sort of online services that allow you to do it through that, but you can also just do it informally on your own with friends and family. There are folks that will look into using their like HSA or FSA to help offset. Sometimes they might need like a letter of medical necessity for that. So it's something to look into. We're seeing more and more employee benefit plans and some insurance cover some amount of doula support. So now this also kind of runs the gamut because there are employee benefit plans that are not exactly insurance, right? So some of them started actually as fertility benefits. There's one called Carrot. There's one called Maven. There's one called Progeny. I'm sure there's plenty more. And what they offer is reimbursement. And they'll have requirements for, what doulas are eligible for that reimbursement. But we see anywhere from like $3,000 to tens of thousands of dollars worth of reimbursement. Sometimes it's a lifetime benefit and families are deciding how much to use, for this child versus another child. But that's kind of on the high end. There's some insurance, and this is new, so I won't know everything about the insurance landscape. But there are some insurance plans that also either offer some reimbursement or the doula would have to be processing that insurance. Sometimes those are pretty low amounts. However, sometimes they seem like they're a little carved more out for birth and maybe only allow for a couple of postpartum visits. But it's certainly worth looking into, asking HR.
Yeah, another thing that we had with our doula was that she offered a discount if we paid up front. So that's something to consider, asking if some doulas offer that. That was really nice if you're able to financially afford it and say, hey, I can save X amount of percentage if I just pay up front.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and I should have mentioned, some doulas do have packages. So some doulas, I mentioned hourly rates, but not all of them work that way. So some will have like packages, and a package might include a certain amount of shifts plus some belly binding or, nursery planning or other types of things that they work in there. And some will, offer discounts depending on the size of the package. Some don't. There's pros and cons to doing it that way, certainly for the doulas. But that's an option. And then I think the other thing to really keep in mind is that, you can book 5 nights a week with a doula for 3 months straight, or you can book, 3 nights a week for a month and then 2 nights a week for the second month. So one of the ways to save is not just, trying to find these benefit plans or discounts, but just planning a schedule that's sustainable for you. And I emphasize that because I think it is important for families to understand that the only way to save is not to look for a doula who charges the least amount of money or, haggle with a doula to lower their rates. As I explained early on, there are, good reasons why they have to charge what they do, many of them. And so, that's one thing we help families with is, well, maybe are days more affordable because they're shorter shifts? Or do you want a combination of days and nights? Or do you want to start with more and scale back over time? So one of the ways, to save is just to carefully plan out a schedule that fits within your budget. And maybe it's not as many weeks of support as you hoped or as many times per week as you hoped. But any amount with a postpartum doula is going to pay dividends. I mean, we have families, again, that might just hire a doula for 2 or 3 days a week for 4 weeks that, have days and nights for 4 months. But really, any amount is going to make an impact. It's going to help you feel more confident, more knowledgeable. It's going to get you some of that extra rest. And, whether it's a lot or a little, it's meaningful support.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that because we definitely try to make it work with my husband's paternity leave. So when he was on leave, we did less days. And then when he returned to work, we upped up our days because I needed more help. He wasn't as available.
Yeah.
So
that's a great approach.
Yeah, it's really nice to have that flexibility, especially if you can be upfront and know what your schedule is going to look like once that baby comes.
That's right. That's right.
So with all of that, let's talk about the ideal time to start looking into a postpartum doula and when to start booking one and what you should look for when vetting somebody for this.
Yeah. Okay, good. I like this question a lot because I just think the more we can get the word out that people need to plan in advance, the better off everyone will be because doulas do book up. Now, certainly when I opened my agency 10 years ago, we would get more last minute requests and service wasn't as well known, but doulas book up many months in advance. And if you think about it now, a doula now in May might be booking with a family who's due in November, but that family might hire them for 3 months, which means they're not due until January, right? So I would just say, whenever possible, as you're kind of nearing the end of your first trimester, that's a good time to start the process and you want to make a commitment because if you don't make a commitment, they're not holding open availability for you. So, end of first trimester, maybe into second trimester is ideal just because you'll have more options available to you to find the best fit for you.
Yeah, I love that you just mentioned all of that and to be able to start looking early on. Now, for the vetting process, what does that look like? What are some questions? You are clearly a professional in this area since you vet a lot of them.
Yes, we do. I know. And I feel like that could almost be a whole podcast episode. But, I would say certainly, if you're hiring individual doulas, you're going to want to call some references. As an agency, we call references. We do a criminal background check. We verify things like their proof of training and CPR certification. And we also, of course, ask every family for feedback so that we are keeping tabs on how the doulas are doing and coaching them if they need support or improvement. So, I think that's, one of the benefits of going through an agency is they can also not just do the vetting, but kind of match you with someone who's going to be a good fit for your family availability wise and qualifications, specialty area wise. So an agency is one way to accomplish some of that vetting, but solo doulas, I would say you're calling multiple references, you're having, at least one interview, whether it's FaceTime or in person. What else for private doulas? Yeah, you might request some paperwork to back up what they're saying their credentials or qualifications are. But speaking to other families is a really important part of it. I think you'll get a good sense of the doula by doing so. And what I'll do, since I know we're limited on time here, I will create a resource, like I was mentioning, the YouTube channel, that helps families know, like, even just what to ask the references. Because that's one thing, is like, we really know kind of what to ask and what to dig for to determine, appropriateness. So I can share some more resources about that as well.
That would be wonderful. So I'm going to have all of your information linked in the show notes. So if anybody wants to reach out, if you have that link, I'll put it on there. But do you have any other tips, suggestions, or recommendations for anyone out there listening that's maybe interested in looking to see if they can hire a postpartum doula?
Yeah, I guess I would say, the planning in advance is really sticking with me as an important part of this conversation. And then I just had one other thought, and I'm going to try not to lose it. Planning in advance. And then I guess I would just say, of course, it's an expense, right? And one thing that helps some families is to just keep in mind that it's not some new ongoing, it's not 4 years of daycare or anything like that. It's not a new ongoing expense. It is a one-time expense that won't be recurring too much for you, depending on how many kids you have, right? And that it really, it's a vote for your health, the health of your relationship, your bonding, and your ability just to ease your transition during this really huge and critical time in a family's life. So it's an investment, it's an expense, but like we've talked about, there's ways to kind of find where you fall on the spectrum of how much you can spend on this. And I think you'll find it's just an investment in your well-being and your family's well-being.
Yes, it really is. I wish I had done this the first time around. I wish I had known about it. And it was something where I said, second baby, we're doing it, because it really is for the entire family or the parents, right? To just have that support where you don't feel guilty asking them to help you with, given the boundaries that you guys have agreed to with that support. So yeah. I love
Yeah.
that.
And one last thing is, we talk about guilt and help and extra hands, but it's also, you're going to have a bajillion questions in those first few weeks and months. And those questions change from week to week. And so it's also that, just a vote for peace of mind, knowing that when this comes up or we hit this roadblock, there's someone we can talk to about it.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us about this topic. I'm so glad that we were able to go over this, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about.
Yay. Well, I appreciate it. It was really nice getting to know you and chatting with you. And I hope it's helpful to your audience.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for our next episode. You can find us on Instagram for more updates and tips. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and give us a review if you like us.